Do you or someone on your senior leadership team have ADHD? Lisa Drennan is joining Chris and I to take a clinical look on how to make that work well at camp. Hello, Camp Mavericks, and welcome to the CampHacker podcast. My name is Travis Allison. This is brought to you by Ultra Camp and the Camp Recruiting and Retention Playbook from Joanna Warren Smith and I. I am a summer camp consultant specializing in getting parents to open, read, and act on your emails.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Hudson. I too am a camp consultant specializing in diversity, equity, inclusion, especially around race and LGBTQ issues. Once upon a time, I started a camp called Camp Highlight. It's super cool. You should Google it. And I'm super excited to see these people.
And hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Drennan, founder of Merge, Diversabilities, Inclusion Consulting. Glad to be here today. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Chris, for having me.
We are grateful to have you here, Lisa. We have a really interesting topic today because it relates to me, but something happened this year that I will tell you about as the introduction to that. I want to spend a second and say, Lisa, we're grateful that you're here. How did
Yes.
you get connected to camp?
Yeah, great story behind this. I had worked in the field of supporting folks with disabilities for 30 years. So I was working with folks with intellectual, developmental disabilities, including ADHD, other neurodivergent diagnosis, and folks with different disabilities.
Yep.
So my background started in the camp world when I moved over to working at the South Shore YMCA, and that's just south of Boston, Mass. I became the director of inclusion, and that was a big eye opener to now be working with organizations helping to welcome in our community members with disabilities or diverse abilities into their existing programs. And one of the first projects that I overtook was ensuring that the camps there, the day camps, were inclusive. So we were moving from a different model of where
Yep.
they were previously segregated to full
Mm.
inclusion. And it was through that work. And then the YUSA had me run a diverse abilities working group with otherwise across the country that, really solidified helping other camp organizations during that time to be more inclusive in their practices.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure there's lots of interesting stories about your experiences with inclusion, Lisa, which I hope that we get to next season and get a chance to talk to you and some others about that work that's really important in our industry. But today we are going to focus on ADHD. One of the reasons was I put up what I thought was kind of just a softball application for a session at Tri-State this year called Bad Brain, work being an ADHD camp director. And the room is packed. And it was a solid hour, people on the floor. It was definitely overflowing into the hallway. And, at the end of it, a lot of people came up to me and said, some came up to me in tears and said, I didn't know that we were here so strong. I didn't know there were so many of us here. And it's always seemed like this is just such a great job for a person with ADHD in so many ways. And so I thought we'd spend a little bit at the end of the season exploring that. And I wanted to do it with Lisa and Chris because of their education and experience, both as educators and people being really specific about inclusion and all of those things, because I have my personal perspective and so it and I think it's an important thing to say at the beginning that everybody's ADHD is their own, and some things that work for some and some don't others. But um today what I want to talk about is more from a clinical side. What are some things that organizations need to think of if you're a person who's a camp director with ADHD? What a lot of it has to revolve around communication in so many ways. And then how can we support staff, all staff, but in this case, I really want to think about the camp director position, how we support that. Chris, what do you think is the best mindset to go into this as a camp leader?
A camp leader with ADHD.
A camp leader who, yes, or a camp that wants to be intentional about this kind of inclusion.
So, the way that I'm thinking about it is it's two different ways.
Mm.
First of all, if you are a camp director who has ADHD, by the time you've gotten to be a camp director, you already have a selection of tools that you've used to be organized enough to get to that position. And so, whatever's working, keep working on that stuff, right? When we talk about creating an inclusive environment as
Mhm.
far as staff is concerned, Now we're talking about intentionality, which is my middle name, like being very thoughtful about and deconstructing the foundations of what we expect at camp, what we expect at staff, and then asking the question, why? Why does it have to be that way? For instance, and this is true all across any camp that has a schedule, which is 100% of them, we prize and we value punctuality, right? And we prize the ability to show up. Everyone needs to get at the same place at the same time. Now, I'm not here to
Usually with the
say,
same things,
yes,
having
usually
several of the same things.
you
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah, you do.
And I'm not going to be one to say, oh, we can dismiss all of that.
Mm.
However, we can be thoughtful about what does it mean, and as far as like the same things and access to those things, is it really important that everyone get that right on the first try? Is it really important that like everyone show up at the same time with the same stuff 100% of the time? What is your wiggle room there? And be honest about that. How much wiggle room do you have? And it's quite possible, depending on the program that you're running, you don't have a lot of wiggle room. Okay,
Yep.
that's cool, right? But if we are not purposefully, but if we are designing situations and schedules and environments that are very exacting and very punitive for no reason, then my question is simply why? Setting up those things is necessarily leaving people out who don't have the necessary capacities, but
Yeah,
could still fully perform their job function and
absolutely.
still fully be generative to the situation.
And kids will love them, and they'll be the kind
Of
of staff
course.
member that, yeah. And I think another, just a quick point on to yours. I think also, Chris, at this, when we talk about those situations where we expect people to show up prepared, on time, etc.,
Yeah.
we tend to have the best of us anyway, have an incredible amount of patience for kids in that situation that I worry we're not showing to staff members in that situation as well. Maybe even ourselves. The one of the things I think that was um, really instructive in preparing for my tri-state session was coming to the realization that it is pretty universal emotional experience of people with ADHD to feel guilt and shame
Mhm.
over our interactions with the world and how people have made us feel. Now, I'm going to work very hard not to personalize this all the time because I want to get information from you. I want it to be shareable. We are going to do a follow-up show to this one where myself and 3 or 4 other camp directors with ADHD are going to talk about things that work for us. So hopefully people can get some tools from that. But Lisa, you had lots of good head nodding along the way. What are the sort of philosophical things we go into this to making this successful for folks?
Yeah, no, just echoing what Chris said. But I do want to share right off the bat that I'm a person who identifies as being neurotypical, right? So most of my learning is by listening to people or parents of kiddos or campers who have ADHD to try to understand. So I read something the other day, and it was just perfect timing that I was coming into this. But someone actually had as part of their introduction is that I'm a person, I have ADHD is my attribute. And that's how they identified themselves as an attribute. And I think that really aligns with everything that how I take
Mhm.
inclusion, especially around disability inclusion, is that we are strengths focused, not deficit focused.
Yeah,
And to really like just pour on that discovery of what makes someone shine, what are they great at, what are their strengths, and put more focus on that. It's a very neurotypical world, right? We design everything to be in you do this, you show up this way. Everything is built around a very neurotypical mind. And we need to open up and listen to the attributes, rather than most people, if you had said, tell me what your thought is on ADHD. They might, oh, hyperactive, distractible, right? Impulsive. They talk excessively, disorganized. And it's like,
yeah,
I don't see that at all, right? I see um, humorous, empathetic, resilient, right? Energetic, spontaneous. I see all of those great things, adaptable or unique. And let's focus on that. So I think if we just come in with it in that lens, old school thinking was the medical model that these people need to be fixed and think the way we all think, or change the way that they do, they interact in the world to be exactly like us. But I think we're better off if we really look at all those strengths and incorporate that into our formula of expectations, and making accommodations, and all that is all around focusing on somebody's strengths. So that's a nice place to start for me.
I
Strength
agree.
focus. Yeah.
I agree.
And I can't, you know, we can't miss the point that a lot of what we do at camp is educational for the kids. A lot of what
Mm,
we do is role modeling for the kids,
yes.
right? So
People
I
hadn't
think,
here listened long enough. They have heard me go on rants about relationships and the camps
right?
that don't allow relationships.
So, oh, we have done a whole episode about that. And but like it is important for the kids to know that mistakes can happen and
Yep.
that there are different ways to arrive at the same thing. And sometimes, and I was guilty of this as a young camp director. Sometimes we get so caught up in the exactitude of the position. We get so caught up in the exactitude because we have an idea of what we want camp to be in our head.
Mhm.
And for me, I always wanted to be one part Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters and
Mhm.
one part Disney World, and Disney World, especially something that is so routinized that I get locked into thinking that camp has to be the same way, missing the
Yeah.
point entirely,
Mhm.
which is that, what I think the whole point about camp is instructing children, not just instructing them, but just showing them that there are many pathways to the same thing, and the
Yeah,
pathway that gets you there for you is different for me. So if I'm a camp director lording over the staff and not allowing them to explore those pathways, I'm not being a good educator for my charges.
sure,
Yeah.
sure, sure. And Chris, I agree. We're educators every day when you're in the camp world. And if we think of it this way, representation matters. So, not that you have to share about your personal experience, but I also have a hard time with this. And here's what I do. Oh, you do? Like, I'm
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
bad kid anymore, or the, blank kid anymore. That there are adults out there who are leading and who are changing our lives. I could be that adult too.
Totally.
So there's possibility because often, particularly with ADHD, I think the statistic goes that bef before a youth who reaches the age of 12 who is diagnosed with ADHD, they hear 20,000 more negative comments and
Hmm.
directives than the
Hmm.
neurotypical peers.
Good Lord.
20,000 of the stop it, cut it out, doing, and to speak, Travis, what
This
you
is
said
the
about
guilt and
feeling
shame bubble
guilty,
that we live
shame,
in.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm always messing up. And can we
Hmm.
change that narrative and
Hmm.
just not, it's not about messing up or being bad or you have to be this way. Like you said, Chris, we might get to this, this end path here, this
Yeah.
Mhm.
way,
Yeah.
or this way. And that's okay. And we're okay with making modifications or accommodations to help you be successful.
Mhm.
Yeah. One of the things that made this important, even though I knew it was personally important, one of the things I thought it was important to discuss this year is the rising backlash as more people are being diagnosed. There's been a massive wave of diagnosis, especially in the last 5 years. A lot more adults, a lot more girls and women, et cetera. And then I think just because I'm kind of sensitive to it, there's a lot of people saying, well, everybody has a little ADHD. It's like, mm, everybody has some characteristics. But there is a rise in people being willing to talk about it. That was never there when I was diagnosed 30 years ago. Um, there is a rise in people sharing coping and people just sharing on the internet what it's like. It's the same. There's so many other discussions going on because of so many other positive things that are coming out in the world. Open discussions that are opening because there's a access to each other through the internet and we can kind of
Mm,
gather and find some things. So this is like the best metaphor for this for me is looking at the diagnosis or the number of people who were self-described left-handed people up until the 1950s or 60s when they were forced to be right-handed, and then all of a sudden you have this bubble of left-handed people. It's like, oh no, it's not that there were more left-handed people all of a sudden, it's that they're allowed to be left-handed. And I think that there is some important things to realize when you're starting to think about how can we be the kind of camps that we want to be, that we celebrate diversity in all of its fashions, but we're trying to be as sensitive and open to learning.
Mhm.
And I love Lisa's questions of like, tell me a little bit about what it means to you and tell me a bit how you describe it, et cetera, I think is really helpful.
yeah.
I think
Now,
I
and
Go
I
ahead,
could,
Lisa. No, no,
oh,
you go ahead.
um, and to that point, thinking about more diagnosis, right? I think what's happening now is there's more conversations and that willingness to say, this is what I experience.
Hmm.
there's a lot more late in life, discoveries, right? That
Yes,
maybe
a
somebody
ton.
who just, went through the radar, just kinda got through school, maybe they was in trouble, they were identified as the behavior kid or this or that, and just got through school, right? And then as an adult, perhaps they're realizing I'm struggling with this or that. You hear another peer or somebody, or you listen to a podcast, and you say, Yeah, I have that too," right?
Mm,
And
mhm,
then it's okay that I can go, maybe I gotta talk to, my doctor about this at my next appointment, right?
mhm.
So, I think when we have an openness and a willingness to have more conversations around this, that it's not like a hidden or a bad thing, or that, "Oh, you would have been diagnosed as a kid," right?
Mhm.
No, not at all. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
And also thinking about the environment and where people land and how that environment was created, the idea that most things are built around the average experience, which at first sounds like, oh, that sounds like a good thing to do. But then you have to think about who got to determine the average in the first
Absolutely. That
place.
was my next point.
Do you know
Mhm.
what I mean? And so I think you think about all these increased diagnoses, that there's a lot of reasons why that is. But, and I love the left-handed metaphor that you put, because that's it entirely. This idea that there's more increased diagnoses, no, there's more recognition that the average experience, created as it was probably for middle class white boys and
Boys.
men,
Mhm.
that doesn't work for a lot of people. I think a lot about this, that I'm labeled lactose intolerant, which I think is fun because most humans are.
Yeah,
A small group of people a small group of people and their descendants can actively consume dairy. Usually, people descended from Scandinavian countries, Northern European countries. But yet, I'm lactose intolerant as opposed to them being lactose enabled. Like
sure.
but the use of the language
Yeah.
already dictates what's normal and what's not. And like I said, going back to intentionality, when we think about what we want to do at camp and how ADHD can impact certain aspects of that, okay, that's fine. Again, why are these particular things? Why did we select them to be important? Why did we select them to be the average experience?
So then, accepting all this as the foundation of the discussion, how do we be better? How can we be better? How can we, as an industry, be better? So let's leave the specifics of how can you, as a person with ADHD, be a better camp director. We can touch on it, but I really want to focus on how the industry, how a camp who cares can be better. I don't know this. I'm curious about this. Um, is ADHD and its close cousin autism, are they written into like, are they, because they're in the diagnosis manual, are they now included into things you must accommodate legally in the US? You know what I mean? Like, if you have to have legal accommodations for people with other disabilities, is that
Mhm.
now included?
Yeah,
And
no,
if
that would
either
be
one of you want to say,
included.
I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on a
Yeah,
podcast, you're
no,
welcome.
absolutely. But
Yeah.
my understanding is that making modifications or accommodations, you would follow the same practices as if, can someone physically access your building or campsites, right?
Yeah.
But making those, and these are all, it's universal design principles,
Sure.
making it
Thank you.
part of your camp policies, procedures, practices, so that it's culture, that you use inclusive strategies, which happen to be really helpful for I always say for our campers, right? But it's truly helpful for our adults as well, who could be camp counselors, they could be CITs, volunteers, they could be camp directors, right? So
Yeah.
the same principles. And it was funny when I was kind of preparing my mind for what would be on here.
Mm.
I'm literally giving the same training to my, during this season to
Yep.
camp, about
Mhm.
how you include in our campers with, who identify as being neurodivergent, right?
Mm.
So same thing for our staff. It's just, you just tweak the lens a little bit. Same practices. So, and
Yeah.
I think that, and I love how you started by, identifying this as a talk about clinical. And I think so. Our goal here today should be, and what I think we should do as those educators, is
Mm.
turn that clinical into practical, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do we how do we take all that clinical information that we've learned or discovered or experienced ourselves in our work, and turn that into bite-sized chews for our camp staff, whether it be as a peer or supervisor or as a, camp counselor for our kiddos who are camp youth. So yeah, so do that.
And
Can I, Chris, before
sure.
Lisa, would you mind defining universal design, please, before we move on?
Yeah,
It's a
sure.
good thing.
So this is the idea is that we build practices, we build buildings, we build programs right
Policies
out
and
of the gate, right out of the gate to be accessible to all.
mm,
So what that means is that we don't wait until we have a situation or somebody comes in who's, oh, they have a difficult time with the schedule or they're having challenges with transitioning from one activity to another. We should probably do this. If you do it right out of the gates, right? So whether that's a practice or you're building a new, kind of campsite, right? Or
Mhm.
a new building, community
mm,
building. Build it with the practicality of making it work for everybody. So what I like to say, it's beyond ADA. It's just not making your width, 3 feet. Now make it 5 feet because that makes more sense. Because if
yeah,
someone who utilized a wheelchair and wants somebody to walk next to them, then that would make more sense, right? How
yeah,
do we design what we offer in the spaces that we have in a way that it just works for everybody out of the gates? Then it's inclusive right from the start.
yeah. Thank you.
And that sounds really overwhelming to people.
Mhm.
And no, and that's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay that it's overwhelming. And I think it's really important in a conversation about accommodations is to let people know, yes, we're thinking about what works for everybody, but
Hmm.
understand what your limits are, especially as a camp. Understand what your limits are, therefore, how you have to communicate what those limits are, both during hiring and registering campers. There are definitely the campsite that we rent for Camp Highlight, we rent the space,
Mm,
right? So
hmm.
we can't decide to make capital improvements on it.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
have to be very clear with people about the kinds of things that we can accommodate, both for staff and campers, and the kinds of things that we can't. It doesn't make us terrible people, right? It doesn't make us ableist. It makes us really honest about the kind of experience that we're providing and for who. I feel a kind of way when well-meaning camp people are like, just send your child in, we will figure out the accommodations. No, 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 no. Again, all are welcome here is a very different vibe than this was created with you in mind. If we cannot intentionally accommodate people, we need to let people know that. And just quickly, you know, once we got a staff application for someone who said that they have a problem with loud noises and crowds, and there's something else. The surprises, loud noises, and crowds.
right.
That was a conversation with someone, and I said, I understand that. And I asked this, no judgment. Why do you want to work at a summer camp? Like, what do you
Mm,
think this
mm,
experience can do? Because I said, as much as we could accommodate you, I, I don't think you could be a counselor. We
right.
can find another position if that's interesting to you, but our limits are we can't eliminate those three things from our program unless we're willing to do a different program, but that's just not what we're
Mm,
doing.
mm,
And being very clear about that can be, I think some people experience that as like, oh no, I'm admitting that I'm a bad person or I'm doing a bad thing. I'm like, what you're actually giving someone is the gift of choice, letting
yeah,
them know what you can do for them and what you can't. And that will be appreciated.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, what are some specifics that an organization should put in place? What are the things that will help this camp director, this student, this staff member succeed at camp? What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I would start with, and these are the prime examples that I come
Please.
right out of the gate
Yeah.
of for our campers, but to think about any visual tools are
Right.
going to be helpful, right, to organizing. So
Yes.
whether it be a visual schedule, so for a camper, it's first we have archery, then we have
Hmm.
swim, then we
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
lunch. But for an employee, a camp staff, or a director, okay, here are the tasks. First, we have this part of the day, then this part of the day. Then you have to come back and make your phone calls, or you have to input this information, or
Yeah.
whatever the role is that we have visual tools. So it'll be the schedule, but then also don't discount. We talked about this earlier, expectations. What are the expectations? And Chris, I agree. We have to be very clear. Here is what is expected of you as a camp counselor, right?
Mhm.
So, A, B, C, and D. And yes, it might get loud, right? So then we'd have to have that discussion with somebody who I don't like loud crowds, or I don't like noises or surprises. Day camp might not be the best for you, but let's look at what you could do. What are your strengths? Where are your, maybe they happen to be an artist and just running
Mhm.
art part of it
Exactly.
would be that's
Exactly.
the fit. So it's finding out what their strengths are, right? So, but that would go through the expectation process, right? So we're extremely clear about what your role is, but in here's what we do. If there's a part of it, we have a discovery phase, and the same thing with our campers. I want to find out what that counselor is good at, or what that supervisor is good at, what are their strengths, and capitalize on that, right? And just kind of switch the narrative a little bit there,
Thank
rather
you.
than,
Yes.
Here's your job. You have to do
Yeah.
A, B, and C." But if they're really good at organizing, maybe there is a part of what we do in our camp roles that would be better suited for this person, right? So
Mhm.
Mm.
maybe being the person who's going to stand up and lead all the songs loud and clear at lunchtime is not going to be the role for this person, but there's a
Exactly.
better role for them. So
Yeah.
discovering that up front, so yeah, visual expectations as well. And I think anytime we can, create in just a listing, right? So whether
Mm.
that's like your instructions or to-do list, what are the long-term goals? What are our short-term goals? And looking at that. And then any time management strategies out there. Now there's apps that you can use, right? You want to be able to tap into any kind of assistive technology. And I think as a supervisor, not only we should offer that, right? So yes, oh, well, have you tried this app? Have you been doing this? Or we utilize this. What do you use? So I think if you're being the supervisor, our number one priority is that discovery kind of practice ahead of time to learn. I think we need to give space, right? We have to give space and grace to allow someone to come out and say that I have ADHD, or even they don't even have to. I'm not big on diagnosis. I'm big on traits and characteristics. What do you experience? What do you experience? What's going to help you to do your job the most effectively? So we want that space and that grace. So whether it's in the, application process, or when you're doing interviews, what would be helpful when you just give the okay? It's okay. Like there's no shame or embarrassment, right? We want to move away from that and just say, are there modifications that you might need in your job? Right? Okay. Can I put my headphones on during lunch? Yeah,
Mhm.
sure. Can I put my earplugs in? Absolutely. Maybe we have to rearrange somebody's schedule a little bit to give
Mhm.
sensory breaks, or allow during meetings that they can be using a fidget tool if that's what helps them. Absolutely. Maybe we need to give an agenda before a meeting so that they can process what's going to happen. How do I prepare for this meeting? Right. So I think those are just some of the basics. They're the same things we would do with our campers, but let's just turn it over. Are we that intentional with our staff? Do we give
Totally.
the grace to say, and the place to say, here's some modifications that I need? Because some people might think, I can't do that. Look at,
Yeah.
here's the
That
rules.
grace, that
Here's my
openness.
job.
Hmm.
Yeah, let's do it.
And your focus on traits,
Yeah.
like absolutely, I want to give a standing ovation because you know what? In an interview, or in an interview, even with a staff member or a parent who's saying their kid, just saying like, oh, well, this person has ADHD, you sit back with your arms crossed. I don't have enough information
Hmm.
about what that means for you.
Hmm.
Yep.
Everyone's ADD, ADHD looks different. What modifications do you use now? What tips and tricks and tools do you use now? And how effective are they? And that way we begin the conversation of, okay, what is this going to look like? But Travis, your question was with specific things people can do. One, include as many people as you can in the planning
Hmm.
of camp. And what I
Hmm.
mean by that is that, I know at my camp, it's the same 4 or 5 people who every January we're like, all right, let's get it going. But opening that up to parents or staff who have particular traits that make the traditional camp experience more challenging than it is for most, bringing those people in. And it doesn't have to be to plan every aspect of it, right? I'm not saying to hand out promotions to people, but it's important to listen and get feedback about what's working and what's not, and for who. On top of that, during the camp session, providing feedback to staff which is, again, we can do, and I do an actual whole training song and dance on that for 3 hours straight. We don't have the time to get into it now, but giving feedback to staff about their performance and about their capacities, right? I've noticed that you struggle with this. What's worked? How can I help you? These are the expectations, right? These are the expectations, and this is how I think you can meet them. Or you give me like that constant feedback loop with people, so you know that you're doing a good job as an administrator, and you're communicating to them again what their expectations are and engaging the staff member in the solution process of like, how can we do it? Too often, it's like a closed door discussion. Oh, Counselor X really can't get places on time. He's forgetting the kids' names. Da, da, da,
Yeah,
da.
yeah.
What are we going to do about them? Not including that staff member.
Mhm.
And why would you do that? Like, we're a long way from lords and serfs. And
Mhm.
I always say that because it's like supervision, administration doesn't have to be punitive. It can
Yep.
be it could be collective. And the last thing I wanted to say, just structural changes. I wrote down structural changes, but now I don't remember what I meant by that. I just think structural changes as part of the feedback process. If someone says, "Hey, it'd be really great if you know," I think it looks something like this. If we expect everyone to be at dinner at 6 p.m., right? A structural change could be like, maybe there's a 10-minute bell and a 5-minute bell.
Mhm.
Maybe we pick a camper to run around to all the cabins, be like, hey, we got 10 minutes left. Because you know what? Some camper would love to do that, right? They would love to run
Yes.
screaming, 10! They'd love it. So let them do it. And if that's all it takes for
Yeah.
someone, like that's an easy change that can be made. That's a new tradition or a routine that you can start. And just, you ask for something specific, maybe this is not specific enough, but being open to those things and understanding that it's not changing the foundation of your camp. Um, no, I'll take that back. It is changing your foundation of your camp, but it's actively designing a legacy for your camp as a
Yeah.
place that is inclusive and
To be
welcoming
more
to
open. Yeah.
everybody.
It's
Yeah.
universal design right there. It's just
There you
making
go.
that change because it works for everybody,
There
right?
you go.
Yes.
Doing that transition countdown procedure should just be what you do, right? It's
Yeah.
just culture because it helps those who, would panic if you're like, we have to be at dinner right now,
Mhm.
when they didn't have time to get ready or prepare in their head or,
And
get ready for the next activity.
I can hear people saying, well, most people don't need that. And I'm always like, did you hear what you just said? Most people don't need that. So we
Yeah.
agree. Some people do.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
And you'd be
Sounds like
surprised.
there it is. Sounds like we're on the
Yeah.
same page. If some people need it, why wouldn't we do it?
Right, right.
Period. End
And
of
we
list.
wanna we wanna be clear that we do these practices because they're good for everyone, right? Inclusive
Yes.
strategies are good for
Mhm.
everyone and not just, we don't walk around with a
Yes.
A on our forehead like,
Yep.
"Oh, these kids over here have autism or ADHD, so we're going to, do a visual schedule with them." No, we just
Yeah.
use it for everyone because I can
Yeah.
tell you, I don't have a diagnosis, but I get uber focused on schedules. So
Yep.
I have to know what's coming up next, then I can relax a little bit. So there, it's gonna benefit me. Boom, who would know, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
There it is. Yeah.
oh, yeah, yeah.
And the other point to that is that most people don't need it most of the time. And everybody might need it at some of the time. So that's why we build it. We build it for the people who need it most of the time. And then we build it because most of us will need it some of the time.
Mhm.
And it's
Or
not
some
just
people need
ADHD
it.
people who
Yeah.
are chronically late to things. It's there's all those things that everybody could take advantage of that. And that brings me to one of my specifics is that staff training has to change.
Mhm.
And the
Always.
sit down in an hour block and be talked at in 90-degree heat in in some dining hall is not a good model, has never been a good model, but we've just sort of transported it from old school into camp and said that's how it should be. um and longtime listeners will know, or people who've listened to Camp Code a lot more recently have heard Gab talk about how they do training at Waro, which is in half-hour blocks, and people are nominated to be the recorders, and they have to present sort of a visual presentation. They do a wrap-up at the end, just a review at the end, and then they have a visual recording of it, which is very helpful to people with different brains. And it's also a great job to give to people with different brains. I
Mhm.
listen way better when I have something to do.
Mhm.
And that can be big or small, but just processing things that way, even visually, it allows me to absorb things a lot better. So you can accommodate your training. Um, the one of the things that I've really, and again, a really practical thing in terms of working with a person or supervising someone. There's a woman on TikTok that I follow that I really admire. Her name is Ellie Mids, and she's British, and she had a really late diagnosis of, although she's kind of pushing 30. So, but it was definitely in the last 5 years, she had a diagnosis of ADHD and autism that she had been very successful at hiding. And that's another skill that we develop, is kind of masking this disability and figuring out ways around it. But she said something really great about assigning work. And she said, if you want me to do it well and, to the best of my ability, you're going to tell me what to do, by when, and why. So it's not going to
More.
be, no 80s parents because I said so. It is just it's going to be those three things. Here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want it when I want it done, and here's why I want it. And it may even be why I want it in this format, because that may be an incredibly hard to picture thing for somebody whose brain doesn't work the way the designer, their brain works.
That's, you know what's funny about that? I
It
could
should be
imagine
every
that should be
instruction to
everyone.
everybody. Yeah.
But you know what? If because of the way that we've thought about employees, employers, because of the way that we usually think about that, an employee asking like, well, I need to know why I'm doing this is seen as like super aggressive
Rude, yeah.
and rude, right?
Mm,
And insubordinate. But let's think about that. Let's think about where that came from and why.
mhm,
And more importantly, why would such a format serve us now?
mm,
Why is that a bad question to ask? Like, first of all, for camp, every single person up and down should be aware of the why of everything that they're doing, right? Because usually it's safety.
yeah.
And you want people to be keyed into that if that is the case, not just
Yeah.
because I said so. You want people to buy in, like just from like a socio-psychological standpoint, you should be telling people why. But
Mm,
again, I just want to highlight the idea that when we think about it, the way that supervisors interact with the people they supervise, we have a lot of top-down, paternalistic, old
mm,
world ideas
mm,
about it
mm.
that it's not just about people with disabilities or ADHD or autism. It doesn't actually serve anybody,
Yep.
right? Nobody wants to be patronized. Nobody wants to be talked down to. Nobody wants to be commanded.
Mm,
So unless you're in the military and you're running some sort of military camp, because that's part of the process, if you're not, you got to ask yourself, what's this about for me?
mm.
Why can't I be accommodating?
I I'm gonna give it one, two related practical things as my way of wrapping up. I'll come to you both of you. Can let me know if there's more that you want to put in there before we switch gears. So two things that I think can make it easier, like Lisa's visual schedule is so good. Have clocks with hands on them in lots of places. Digital clocks are hard for neurodivergent people to understand, to put together the picture of what do these numbers mean versus how much time I have. And it's easier if you have hands on things to see, oh, I've got, this much time, and I can kind of figure out what this much time feels like to finish that thing. So that's one of it. Another thing that I think is important, helpful, makes everybody happier, is some accommodation around technology. I Many of you know I'm a strong advocate for people not having their phones, but I would definitely accommodate folks to have watches with alarms on them. If I'm, trying to get them to not have their phones, the ability to have a watch with an alarm and hands on it is kind of a weird matchup, but a lot of smartwatches do that thing. But that ability to set reminders easily, quickly, by voice, etc., can make it a lot easier for this person to do the things that they're really very badly want to do because they love camp. Anything else you want to say, or practical things to input, to put out there to camp people, Lisa?
Yeah, I think I'd start with normalize systems for asking for accommodation. So, and the onus should be on the camp,
Yes.
not
Yep.
the
Thank you.
staff member. Like, not like, can it should just be a process that we are giving that space. So normalize that system for asking for accommodations. That should be part of the process. And then consider training for supervisors or peers of persons with diversabilities or neurodivergent, right? So
Yeah.
that we have better understanding or increased empathy, or that we all know what are good, strong, inclusive strategies and practices.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a training that goes, a little deeper than just here's what you do or you can't call your campers, but also let's think about this for peers too in the same type of training.
Yeah. That's
I
good. Thank
would
you.
I would add just a couple of
Mm,
random
mhm.
things. One, depending how big your camp is or whatever, use a mic when you are talking.
Oh, thank you.
I can't tell you how many times
Hmm.
this happened to me just this past weekend, but like we're all, especially if you are a speaker, you're talking, there's always that moment. It's like, oh, you all can hear me without the mic, right? And everyone goes, yes, it's fine. But you know who it's not fine for? The one or two people who are now have to speak up in a room of 300 being like, I can't hear. You know
Yep.
what I mean? That's
Yep.
too
Right,
much pressure
look
to
at them
place.
like,
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
get a
And
mic. Just
yeah.
gotta
So
normalize it. Yeah.
if it,
Absolutely.
yeah, sure, it takes 5 more minutes. It's going to take 5 minutes out of your training module. Use a mic, first of
Hmm.
all. Secondly, for trainings and such, provide transcripts. Zoom does that automatically now,
Yeah.
right? Email it to people afterwards if you're having a Zoom meeting. And if you're doing it live and you can't record it, then whatever notes that you're using to build that training, make sure it matches up with what was said and make that available. Other thing, training manuals on training manuals need to be updated from year to year. I
Yep.
can't tell you how many times like it's like I know it says this in the manual, but this is the way that we're doing it this year. Well,
Mm,
guess what, Mary? Sometimes when people are listening to you, they're not going to get it. They're good. They rely on the training manual. So
mhm.
it's a critical part of your training. It's a critical part of your communication with staff. And the last thing I've already said is a feedback loop, a constant feedback loop with the staff, doing in service, opening the doors for people to come to you to talk about not just what they're doing poorly and how they can improve, but what they're doing well and encouraging them to continue to use the tools or tips or tricks that they are using to be successful, and having them tell you what those tools are, because perhaps 3 years down the line, another staff member with that trait shows up, and now you can be like, hey, you know what someone used before you? X,
Yeah.
Y, and Z. Those would be my tips.
That is a perfect way to end this off. Thank you both.
Mhm.
Before we move on to the next section, I want to take a second and thank UltraCamp for their support. If you're a longtime CampHacker listener, you know that you can go to ultracampmanagement.com/CampHacker and you can sign up for a free demo of their product, very specifically tuned to your camp and what you need. You can also get their free guide called the Marketing Toolbox. And as a professional marketing consultant, I am here to tell you it is time to start thinking about marketing next year. So this is something that I think could be a good tool for you, brought to us by UltraCamp. UltraCamp knows that you didn't get into this job because you love paperwork. That is why they have created this platform that is all in one way to streamline your program management and put it all in one place. So instead of learning multiple platforms, having to go through trainings on Zoom by people who aren't accommodating your needs well, UltraCamp, you can have all of that software, one set of training to learn it all, register and manage your campers, generate and direct communication, organize your schedules and activities, process payments and donations, all in that same place. UltraCamp wants to get you out of your office and spend more time with the kids or the adults or all of the great camp experiences why you got into this job. And if you want to know if UltraCamp is right for you, you can have that free customized demo session and sign up at ultracampmanagement.com/camphacker. That means it's time for our tool of the week. Chris, would you mind starting off the tool of the week this week?
Sure. I have a very controversial one. Actually, it's not. It's just very controversial for me. So, I was thinking, what am I going to use for a tool a week? And I'm always like, well, what is the new things that I've been using lately? But then I looked at my bookcase and I saw this book. It's a book called The Book of Virtues by William J. Bennett. And in it is a collection of stories centered around a particular virtues: confidence, courage, responsibility, faith, etc. And when I was a young counselor, I used to read this book and memorize the stories from it for bedtime stories for my campers. You know, there's, and I'll tell if anyone's ever
So
listened to
good.
this, and I've been your counselor, like you've heard me tell you the story of why frog and snake never play together, the fisherman and his wife, and that all comes from this book. I recommend the book. It's a collection of wonderful stories. On top of that, like it spans the globe and spans like time. There's like musings that Plato had on friendship, story about Rosa Parks, etc. The one caveat I have is that the author William J. Bennett is he was the former U.S. Secretary of Education under Reagan. He is a conservative and he's made some alarming comments about race in the media. And I endorse absolutely none of that he said. However, what I will endorse is this book because the collection that he's put together, it's a wonderful journey and it is, I mean, I use this as a manual to build my camp. The moral education part of it is using some of these stories and the concepts to build. And I'm sure William J. Bennett would be so frustrated to know that his work was the cornerstone in building a queer camp, but here we are. So I would absolutely recommend it for your camp, or even if you have kids, it's just a great thing to select something and read it with them. So
Thank you. Lisa, you brought something really cool for your tool.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on show and tell. I have the Building Friendships Toolkit between people with and without disabilities. So this is a toolkit for community recreation and camp organizations. This was written for you, people who are
Mhm.
listening to this podcast. And number one, it will help you to create a culture of inclusion through strategies, tips, best practices, and what are the pillars of inclusion. So you have a good understanding of that. That's part one. Part two is how do we create that space where a camper with or without a disability, or one who's neurotypical, one who's neurodivergent, have the opportunity to actually put those diagnoses and labels aside and focus on strengths, focus on mutual interest, and make a friend. But it does sometimes, some campers need a little bit of our help in creating that matching and identifying where someone may have a mutual interest. So this goes over all the hurdles you might hit and how
Yeah.
you're going to overcome those hurdles. And it is broken into different layers. So here's the lens you want to take if you are an executive, right? Director, if you are more the supervisor, boots on the ground, and then if you are a parent, family member. But this is really going to help elevate you to creating that really universal design practices where campers can belong and make a friend.
That is perfect. Thank you, Lisa.
Mhm.
Thank you for reinforcing the theme with yours. I'm also going to follow the discussion theme. My tool of the week is something called the Conquering, and it is a tool developed for neurodivergent people to have a fidget something on you all the time. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I have this ring that is kind of U-shaped and has a bar underneath at the bottom. I can turn it around depending on what I need. The bar itself will spin. So it's something just sort of subtle and quiet little fidgety thing that I can do. But my favorite part is that you can click it. I don't know if I can make it show up on the mic, but um, the it's clicky. That is all day, every day clicky. I find myself doing it when I walk because I push the bar out of its position and then click it back into spot. The bar itself will come all the way out of my ring
huh.
because they're interchangeable. So you can get necklaces and other different things. So it's just a little, looks like a watch pin that's in my ring. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that it is just a horseshoe shape that the bar goes, I'm trying to put it so you can see it on camera. The bar goes into it and then clicks into place. So that bar is interchangeable. I picked a very basic bar because I wanted a simple looking ring. You can get much more complicated ring parts, and you can get lots of different inserts for here. And if you buy the bar, I would recommend buying 3 when you buy your ring, because I've dropped mine on the street twice now and had to go searching for the bar. But it's something I find us doing it all the time. I'm just clicking, clicking, clicking. I can do it quietly in a meeting. You don't have to notice. I've been told I don't do it quietly when I'm watching TV. Just a little feedback from the family. But
Eh.
anyway, Conquering, we're not getting a kickback from that. It is just something that I found that I love, and it has been incredibly helpful. I now have a bit of a callus on my thumb from pushing the bar in and out all day long. So there you go. You can find Chris's book, Lisa's book, and the link to The Conquering, which does have tons of much prettier, much more complicated things. Most of the inserts are, in fact, some sort of gem or stone that you can take it off. Those will flip around if you want to take it off and just flick it and spin it. But this is what I picked as the simplest possible version of it. And it has been amazing. So all of those things at camphacker.tv/podcast. You'll find the tool of the weeks from this episode and past episodes, and also past other episodes, because we are fast approaching episode 200. We will finish the season off on our 200th episode. So there's lots of things that we've talked about, lots of different ways. Lisa, if people have follow-up questions or want to, and I think people should, hire Lisa to come in and train their staff, or even better, come in and do a evaluation of how your organization is set up to accommodate everybody, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So email me, Lisa Drennan at mergeconsulting.org. But easiest is to go on my website, mergeconsulting.org. And from there, you can connect to my link tree, social media. You can look at the different trainings that I offer. There's a page of resources that'll be really helpful, including some, freebies, giveaways, as well as other podcasts, articles I've written, things of that nature. So hop on over there, but certainly reach out if you have a one-to-one question for me. I would love to hear from you.
Perfect. You can also go to the top of the gocamp.pro website and look under our products. And Lisa has done 2 webinars for us this spring that are available. The recordings, you can watch them there. They have been very well received. And if you want to pick those up, if you don't have a chance or you need to do this quickly and can't get Lisa to you, then Lisa can digitally come to you. You can watch the recording. So I encourage everybody to check those out. Chris, if people want to follow up with you?
They can just show up at my house. No, I'm kidding. Do not do that. However, you can find me on Instagram at planetchris1. You can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Hudson1. And you can send me an email, chris@planetchris.net, and just say hi. And I want to say, yes, you may stop me in the street. That happened to me last week. I was
Awesome.
saying something, someone said, "Excuse me, are you Chris Hudson?" Like, yes, like I listened to you on a podcast. I said, no
Yay.
way. That was really cool. So feel free to stop me on the street if you recognize my voice.
Perfect. Perfect. That's great. Well, if people want to get in touch with me, show ideas or feedback on shows, Travis at gocamp.pro. Thank you both for this discussion. I got a lot of great stuff from it and reinforced some stuff that I feel passionately. And so I'm grateful to both of you for that. If you are listening to the show, I would also encourage you to check out another Go Camp Pro podcast called The Pudding. The Pudding is our show that explains camp research to those of us who don't live in the camp research world, and gives us some tools to talk better about camp and its benefits, allows us to plan better, etc. So Dr. Mady Baker and I run The Pudding. We've just finished our first season, and we've already started recording our second season that will come out in late summer, early September of 2024. And you can just search on your podcast app for The Pudding. Thanks for the evening, friends.